have to clear that up. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ray Pucci, the president of the Delaware County Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to Chamber Connects. We're recording this morning's program. We're going to post it later, a little bit later on this morning on the Chamber's YouTube channel for later viewing, and all of you will also receive a recording of this morning's program. In just a few minutes, we're going to connect with Todd Heyn. Todd is the Senior Field Advisor for the New York State Farm Bureau. And if you have questions for Todd, please post them in the chat box. Lillian here at the Chamber will be reviewing those, feeding those to me, and I'll be able to ask Todd your questions. Before I introduce Todd, though, let me update you on a few things that the Chamber has been working on. Just as a reminder, the Delaware County Chamber of Commerce is a private, non-governmental, not-for-profit membership organization. Our mission is really centered on three ideas: advocate, connect, and grow. We are the unified voice for business here in Delaware County, and we relay your message to our elected officials and other policymakers in Washington, Albany, and yes, even here in Delhi. We help our members and other business owners connect with area resources like this morning's program, exclusive discount services, and more importantly, with each other to increase their profitability. Finally, we help our members grow their capacities by offering targeted business skill training, including leadership development. And while we're speaking of leadership development, I want to remind you that applications are available right now for our Leader Full Delaware, and I say Leader Full purposefully, our Leader Full Delaware Emerging Leaders Program. It's an 8-month program that starts in late April, and we explore what it takes to develop leaders in our local communities and within your companies. So rather than focusing on those traditional ideas of leadership, what we teach is that effective leaders are compassionate, concurrent, collective, and collaborative. We're also about to resume our 4 weeks to launch entrepreneur training program. We partner with our friends at the DCMO BOCES for this month-long program. It's going to be held on Monday and Thursday evenings during the month of April in both Norwich and here at the Business Center in Delhi. Finally, speaking of BOCES, we're hosting a job and career fair with our other BOCES friends over at the ONC BOCES. That's going to be on May 10th at their Northern Catskill Occupational Center in Grand Gorge. We expect that high school and BOCES students will attend, as well as job-seeking adults. So we're working with the folks over at the New York State Department of Labor to help bring those adult job seekers to that event. And just one last play, maybe a blatant plug here. With the ever-changing news affecting businesses out of both Albany and Washington, having a reliable and accurate information that you can use for your business really has never been more important. The Chamber is one of your sources of assistance, ideas, inspiration, and most of all, the facts. If you're not already a member, I hope that you'll consider joining. Membership is truly an investment in your business every day. I hope you'll consider the benefits of membership. Annual dues start at just $99 a year. So information about membership, Chamber news, registration for events, where else? DelawareCounty.org. Our Chamber Connects series focuses on public policy issues that are affecting businesses here in Delaware County and throughout the Catskill Mountain region. Today, we're going to take a look at some agricultural issues, including the pending reduction of threshold on overtime on our farms. I'm pleased to introduce to you this morning not only a friend of the chamber in Delaware County, but a friend of mine to you this morning as our featured speaker. Todd Heyn and his family own a small farm in East Meredith and currently serves 7 counties along the Mohawk Valley from Herkimer County to Albany. He served New York State Agriculture in this position since 2013. Todd is one of the senior field advisors for the New York State Farm Bureau, and it's my pleasure to introduce Todd Heyn with New York State Farm Bureau to all of you this morning. Todd, welcome to Chamber Connects.
Hey, thank you, Ray. Thank you very much for having me this morning.
So Todd, let's start with a little background. Would you tell us about the actions that the state legislature took? And that was what, about 3 years ago, if I remember correctly, 2 or 3 years ago. And some others that created our current overtime rules on farms.
Yep. Well, taking it back even further than that, a century ago, and this is historically speaking, that agriculture has been exempt from overtime for its workers since the early 1900s. And that's for one reason only, that agriculture is not like the auto industry or any other industry, and that we revolve around Mother Nature and the weather, and it's not predictable. Just like the weather we're having now, it's raining and icy and nasty out there now, but in 2 weeks it may be nice and the fields have dried out and now it's time to get out there and go. And that's what farmers are tasked with, is when it's time to plant, it's time to plant now. It may not be time next week, and I didn't have time last week because there was still snow on the ground.
Right.
So when they have to go, it's 60, 80 hours a week, and let's get it done. For example, same thing on an auto parts factory. If workers strike or if there's a shutdown, those parts just get dusty and maybe rusty. Whereas the cows need to be milked 2-3 times a day, and the pumpkins and corn and wheat need to be harvested when they're ready, otherwise they rot and then they're useless. So that's the background about why there traditionally has not been overtime for those workers in the agricultural industry.
That's great. That's a great background. Great. Thank you for that.
Bringing it into the modern age, over the past few years, there has been legislative, not legislative, but judicial advocacy to win this in the courts, that with the New York AFL-C or Civil Liberties Union, I'm sorry, I get my acronyms mixed up, had tried to sue New York State to bring the right for overtime and unionization, and that consistently failed in the courts. So then it was finally brought in 2019 legislatively, and that's when the Farm Laborers Fair Labor Practices Act was signed in 2019. And that allowed for overtime for farm workers for 60 hours or more.
Todd, if I can just interrupt you for a second, if I remember when that legislation was signed by then Governor Cuomo, didn't he sign that down in Lower Manhattan?
Yes. Yep. Without a farmer inside.
Signing, yeah, where the signing ceremony took place. So if that doesn't give us some real indication of what that purpose of that legislation really was, there it is right there.
Correct.
So
Correct.
yeah, I interrupted you. Go ahead, please.
Not a problem. So that was a multifaceted piece of legislation, because one, it allowed for the unionization of farms, and currently we have a small handful, mainly on Long Island, that have become unionized over the past couple of years. That's a slow but encroaching fact, that once the labor unions figure out the best way to tackle what most of New York farms are, is small 5 and 6 person operations, not 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 employees to make it worthwhile, then we'll see that probably gain speed over time. But what we've been dealing with since then is the overtime threshold issue. And for the past 2 years, since 2020, January 1st of 2020, it has been the law of the land that the overtime threshold is set at 60 hours. And part of that bill also was to create a labor wage board, an agricultural labor wage board made up of 3 people. And they were supposed to look at the current 60 hours and decide only one thing, whether or not it should be reduced down to something less than 60 hours. They were not tasked at any point along the way whether this is justified and it should be raised. It should, go up to 70 or 80 or anything like that. But it was, their only task was, should it be reduced below 60 hours?
So who were the members of that? Who were the members of that 3-member panel?
Sure. There were 3 members. The first of all was David Fisher, the president of the New York Farm Bureau. Second was Dennis Hughes, former president of New York State AFL-CIO, so union guy there. And then the third one was Brenda McDuffie, who is the president of the Buffalo Urban League. Once again, a
lot of farmers there, right?
Yeah, exactly. 1 out of 3 that had anything other than that had anything to do with agriculture other than enjoying 3 meals plus a day. So, yeah. And from the moment that wage board was convened, it was basically a theatrical show that we were along for the ride. We knew what the outcome was going to ultimately be, but we had to play our parts and go along with it at that point.
So what have they done? They made a decision or made a recommendation earlier this year.
Yep. Well, starting in 2020, when this was first convened, they sat down and they held a series of, at that time, because the pandemic had just kicked in, of Zoom interactive meetings where they brought in farm owners, farm laborers, and other concerned parties. And by and large, all of that testimony was very supportive of keeping the overtime threshold at 60 hours. Even most of the Hispanic speaking migrant labor were still supportive of keeping that at 60, if not raising it, which that was not a possibility. But it's very little of the cider house rules, the old migrant issues where the abused worker, that kind of thing. Very little of that came out at all, and it was all anecdotal and hearsay.
Well, Todd, I remember when Senator Metzger was then chair of the Senate Agricultural Committee back in 19, and she held a series of public hearings around the state. I think you were at the one in Sullivan County, and Lillian and I were there, and I testified on behalf of the chamber, and Wayne Marshfield from the town of Hamden also testified about that. And we said that this was a bad idea for agriculture, and we cited a lot of the problems that were involved. But what's striking to me was what you just said, and that is that most of the people who spoke very impassionately and very personally about no, don't reduce this. And this was coming from those who worked. These were coming from folks who live and have supported their families for generations in other countries, mostly south of the border, south of the United States border, with the work that they did here in New York State, throughout upstate New York, during the summer months, where they wanted more hours and they wanted to come and work, and then they could send that money back to support the family back home. So that's interesting that theme continued at the most recent hearings.
Right. Yeah, and so these hearings went through all of 2020, and the wage board was tasked with making a determination at the end of 2020, and their call at that point was basically to punt. And they said, okay, we're going to table this for a year. We don't have enough data on agricultural production, how it's impacted the industry, all of that. So they came at that point a 2-to-1 vote to table this for another year. And then they were tasked with doing the same thing by the end of 2021.
Okay.
So they went through and we did the dog and pony show again at the beginning of this year, because as anything with the state, as you know, it doesn't happen in a timely fashion. So in January of this year, we had another series of testimony that the Labor Wage Board heard. And at that point, as soon as that testimony was over with, they had a vote, and it was once again a 2-to-1 vote, but this time agriculture lost. And that's when the recommendation coming out of the Labor Wage Board was to reduce the overtime threshold from 60 hours down to 40 hours, and to do that over a period of 20 years, and reduce that down in 4-hour increments. So over, every, I believe it's 5 years down 4 hours.
Oh, okay.
And so it goes down incrementally over that time period. So that's where we currently stand. So
and not only is it currently at 60 hours, but please correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it that folks can only work 6 days out of 7?
Right. Yep. There is a part of that initial Fair Laborers Practice Act. There was a mandatory day of rest. And if a farm worker chooses to work on that day of rest, they're automatically given overtime, regardless of how many hours that they're put in. So there's a lot of, shady types of language that are in that,
Okay.
Along the way. So yeah, good point there.
Okay, so the Farm Labor Board, Labor Wage Board has recommended that the threshold be reduced to 40 hours incrementally. Who have they made that recommendation to? Who makes that final determination? And will any member of the state legislature, is it out of their hands at this point? Does the state legislature have any say in the matter right now?
The only power that the state legislature has right now is the power to chew on the governor's ear. Right now, it sits basically in the governor's hands about when she will or won't sign this legislation. And about a week and a half after that wage board vote and recommendation came through, our state president, David Fisher, along with our public policy director, Jeff Williams, sat down and met face-to-face with the governor herself. And at that point, they expressed their displeasure in how this came down and the format of the whole process. And her response was, well, I like the 40 hours. I will sign this bill at some point. And so when it comes to me, I will sign 40 hours. But the only power that the legislature has, like I said before, is to chew on her ear. We have not given up either with the public pressure to apply to the governor's office. Back when this first started in 2019, actually in 2020, early 2020, we formed the Grow New York Farms Coalition, which is made up of some larger agricultural organizations as well as private businesses. In that is us is the New York Farm Bureau, the New York State Vegetable Growers Association, Northeast Dairy Producers Association, also known as NEDPA, the Apple Association, Northeast Agribusiness and Feed Alliance, Association of Agricultural Educators, amongst a bunch of other smaller businesses as well, because we wanted to have a unified voice going forward. And even after this wage ruling came out early this year, even just, I think it was a week and a half ago, we had a large social media push to have the general public directly call the governor's office and say, don't sign this legislation. So we're still putting pressure out there, even though she has told us that she will sign this when it does get to her desk. Rumor has it from some of our lobby appointments that we've made with assembly folks as well as state senators is that she plans to sign this after the elections in November, or in November. You know, for that long. And think about it politically, why upset a large block of your upstate voting constituents before the election? So which is probably going to be contentious as it is with a freshman governor who may or may not go through a Democratic primary as well. So let's wait and then upset people afterwards. So
now in the governor's budget address, she proposed offering farm owners a tax credit that was equivalent to any overtime or any overtime pay that is paid out to workers.
correct.
You know, that, to me anyway, that doesn't seem to be an equivalent compensation. What do you think about that?
Well, it's in that meeting that we had with her, that was the bone she threw to us. It said, even though I'm going to make the farmers responsible for a 40-hour overtime threshold, farmers will not have to pay for it. And without saying it, she said, I'm going to make every New York State citizen pay for it. And it's roughly a $300 million overtime bill that will be placed on the backs of New York taxpayers. And with that, what it is, it's a refundable tax credit for the overtime that is paid below 60 hours. And she thinks that she has the votes in the legislature this year to make that happen. Overall, the agricultural portion of the budget this year is looking very good for us, with very little to fight for this year for the normal, modest increases that agriculture gets. We're like 0.1% of the overall budget, but it tends to be a large political football that gets tossed around each year in what they refer to as the big ugly. So that's, and the nice thing that's the way it's written now is it's a refundable tax credit. So a farm does not necessarily need to show a profit to get that those funds back, because many of our farms, many years, don't show a profit. So that way, they're still going to get that overtime that they pay out back.
But even with that refundable tax credit, it doesn't take into account the additional workers' compensation costs and other things as well. So again, it doesn't sound like a dollar for dollar equivalent here to me.
Right. As it's only one piece of what you're paying out with a wage. As any business owner knows, that the actual wage that you pay somebody is way higher than the actual amount per hour that quote you're paying them, because you've got workers' comp in there, you've got in unemployment insurance, all of that kind of stuff that comes out and adds up, and that's all based on their overall pay. So when you're paying them overtime, that automatically goes up as well. So this refundable tax credit is only based on the overtime hours that are paid, nothing else.
Okay. And just a reminder to everyone who's listening and watching right now, if you have some questions that you would like me to ask Todd, please post them in the chat area. Todd, a minute ago, you mentioned the impact of overtime at being something like $300 million. If that could be transferred to every taxpayer here in New York State. What do you see as some of those implications of lowering this threshold to from 60 eventually down to 40? And what are some of those implications that you and Farm Bureau have already seen with the 60-hour threshold that's been in place now for the last 3 years?
Well, in the entirely, and this is my sarcasm that I'm very fluent in coming through, in the very business-friendly state that we live in, this is just one more brick on that wall. And right now, farmers are price takers, not price setters. So any of our
that's a key, excuse me, that's a key point. Would you explain that a little further?
When anybody in a standard business makes a widget of any kind, they go through a certain process to figure out what I need to charge for that widget in order to make a profit on it. The amount of hours that it costs me to make it, the machinery costs, the raw material cost, all of that goes into the amount of money that I need to charge to actually make a profit to stay in business and to be, quote, sustainable. In agriculture, none of that happens. For example, dairy producers who make milk for cheese and butter and ice cream and all of those items that we like to enjoy that are milk-based, the whole process to set the amount of money that a farmer is paid, and we refer to it as hundredweight, the amount of money that you get for producing 100 pounds of milk. It's not produced by, or it's not sold by gallon. Go ahead.
And how many, just to put that in perspective, I don't want to take you off your track, but yep, just to put in that perspective, approximately how many gallons are in 100 weight?
I want to say, and I just went brain dead on this, but there's roughly about 20 gallons in 100 pounds of milk.
Okay.
Roughly on a general round number.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And so with that, that number is set in a very convoluted, intricate way based on what Europe is doing, and who knows what Europe is doing now. But this is my traditional elevator speech on this, is what Europe is doing with their dried milk that they've had in storage, what China wants to do with milk in 3 years from now, and what New Zealand did with milk last year. As well as the droughts or lack of a drought that California is having. So you've got to figure in local, regional, national, and international pieces, all determines what a farmer will get paid per hundredweight on their milk. And same basic type of thing goes with grain prices, with corn, wheat, soy, any of those commodities, even if you bring it down to vegetables as well. Locally and at small scale, farmers can adjust more of their prices about what they need to get. But really, it's when most people compare, even at a local farmer's market, what the price of a T-bone steak or a peck of tomatoes goes for, they compare it to what they could pay for the same product in a grocery store, in Walmart or Price Chopper or Tops, same type of thing. So they were really not setting their price, they're gauging it along to what the commodity price is along the way. So once again, right back to where we started, they are price takers, not price setters.
Okay, so back to that, to the original question, what's the implication? What have been the implications already of
more than likely
that threshold to 60 and now further reduction?
It automatically makes us less competitive with our neighboring states, which none of our neighboring states have an overtime threshold. So, the cost of doing business for every farm immediately goes up. whether it be apples, picking those in the fall, or your dairy, which is year round, or sweet corn, any of that kind of stuff. We have sweet corn producers here in New York State that ship their sweet corn all the way down to the South and the Midwest each year by the truckloads. And so the price that they need to get for that automatically goes up, but they may not necessarily get that. So that may, it's one more factor to cause a farm owner to say, what am I really going to produce at what scale, and how am I going to make $1 on it, or do I do something totally different?
Okay. And you used that $300 million number a little while ago. So whether or not that refundable tax credit comes into play, that's at least $300 million, probably closer to $4, that comes out of the farm economy. Is that a fair statement?
Yep, absolutely. And so that's, it's just one more nail in the coffin of here in Delaware County, mainly small family farms. And by small, typically under 200 dairy cows, because our topography and geography just don't allow for larger farms that are more common in northern New York and western New York. So,
one of the things that we're always focused on here at the chamber is how that dollar recirculates through that local economy. And I think a case can be a very convincing case can be made that $1 that is produced in an agricultural setting circulates at a higher velocity, if you will, through that local economy. So we're really talking about taking a lot of money, not only out of the farm, but out of our local economy.
Yep, absolutely. One thing that I've explained and described to groups such as this when I speak at Rotaries and Kiwanis and those other community organizations is people say, oh, on my road, there used to be 6 or 7 dairy farms. Now there's 1 or there's none. And really what I explained to folks is even in a small 50 to 75 cow dairy, which is real small by today's standards,
yes.
They have income and expense in excess of $1 million in a year, easily. And all of that money, it may not be profit for them, but it's money that comes in and then immediately goes back out, is spent on local sand, carpenters, feed mills, all of that kind of stuff, electricians and plumbers and welders, all of that kind of stuff that generates and produces income for other portions of our local communities and economies. When that dairy farm goes out of business and maybe just transitions to beef, because that farmer already knows how to work with cows, so I'm just going to go to beef instead of dairy, the amount of income and expense that they have throughout the year is cut by probably 90%. So the amount of money that goes in and gets circulated around the community is drastically cut. So that's the real downside about losing our small dairies, which were commonplace in Delaware County and across much of Northeast, to the larger ones, is we have lost and continue to lose small dairies across the state, even though the number of dairy cows that are in the state has remained relatively constant over the past couple of decades.
Todd, one of the things that I've heard, and anecdotally anyway, is that since the imposition of the 60-hour, 6-day-a-week thresholds, let's call them, that New York State has seen a significant reduction, pandemic notwithstanding, of those migrant workers, those folks that come in on a seasonal basis who are following that harvest throughout the United States, that they're just simply not here anymore because they're going to places where they can get more hours, where they can work more days. Is that an accurate statement?
Absolutely. And that came up during the testimony that we referred to earlier. Many of these folks said, and even their worker or the farm owners said, if I don't treat my employees right, they have such a good communication system between them and their friends and other family that work in other farms that they'll go to bed one night and I'll wake up the next morning and they'll be gone because they've gone down the road to another farm that will treat them better if I'm not treating them well. So we live in a mobile society now, and they realize this too. They come up from Mexico and Guatemala and in all different southern countries on a regular basis. So moving is not a big deal. They can get around. And when they come up, as we referred to earlier, they want to put in the hours while they're here. If they're true seasonal workers under the H-2A program, that's a federal migrant labor program. If they're here for the season, picking corn and doing whatever that they're here for, they want to put in as many hours as they can while they're here. 60, 70, 80 hours a week is what they want. And they've told us that that's what I want. And they also understand that if the farmer has to pay time and a half over a certain threshold, the farmer more than likely can't afford that. So the farmer is now in a quandary about how do I keep as many employees as possible to get the work done that I need, but pay them as little as possible because I can't afford it. And so do I try and hire extra people and only put them on at 60 hours or 59 and a half hours so I don't have to pay the extra overtime? Well, that sounds great on paper, and that would solve the issue if we had and even in normal circumstances, a labor glut, which we don't. We have, trying to find labor under any circumstance is challenging, much less the hard work that those in agriculture enjoy and do. So, even last summer, I took a family trip down to Tennessee, and I think we hit 13 states over a period of 2 weeks. And every main street that we drove down, every other business had a help wanted sign out. It's just amazing. So
no different here, right?
Exactly. Same thing here. It's not just New York.
Yeah, even most recently, we look at the January unemployment figure here in Delaware County, there was 4%. That's the lowest it's been in at least 30 years, maybe longer. Department of Labor only reported out 30 years of data. And in December, we had an unemployment rate of 2.8%. So it sounds like the creation of that 60-hour threshold has made our labor shortage even worse, and reducing it further is only going to exacerbate that situation.
Yeah, because as these migrant international workers are looking at where to go, they typically come back to the same farm year after year after year. And many told their farm owners last year saying, if I can't get more hours, I'm going to seriously look at going to a different farm in a different state instead of coming to New York because it's not fiscally advantageous to them.
So let me just make sure I got this right. As we're talking about some implications, we've kind of created a situation where we have less workers, more stress on farms, who owners may be cutting back on staffing, and the only way you can cut back really on staffing is by cutting back on production. So are we really talking about implications for the security of our food supply and the cost of food?
Absolutely. I mean, we've all seen the inflation in the grocery stores over the past 6 months, and Ukraine notwithstanding and all of that going on right now. But we're seeing because of the just-in-time distribution system that we've had, as well as what's going on with fertilizer prices, and that started last fall. with fertilizer prices doubling, if not tripling, in which many farms buy their fertilizer in the fall, right after harvest, when they have the dollars to be able to do so.
Right.
And so they found, oh, wow, I can only afford half of the fertilizer that I normally have done. And I've asked many of our member farms, how is that impacting you this year? And by and large, fortunately, most of our local farms are not really curtailing how much they're planting or what they're planting, but they're not expecting as good of a yield on their fields this year. So instead of getting, the highest yield possible, for example, on hay, which goes to feed cows and our beef animals and those types of things, if you put down $1 worth of urea on your hay fields, you'll typically get back $2 worth of hay due to increased growth and all of that.
Okay.
Well, now that same amount of urea costs $3. So are you going to put $3 down to get $2 back? Nobody's going to do that. So they're not going to put anything down, or they're going to really look at the local fertilizer that they have, their manures, and
Right.
how best and where best do I distribute those, keeping all the environmental types of issues that we all, nobody wants manure running off into our streams and creeks and all of that. So keeping all of that in check as well. So that's just one of those things. You got supply issues affecting our prices. You've got fertilizer issues affecting prices. You've got the crises over in Russia and Ukraine, which Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe. And so who knows when the growing season comes around there, whether farmers will be able to get out into their fields and plant their crops or not. Most of our, one of the largest suppliers of fertilizers and potash and all of those soil amendments comes out of Russia. The second is China. So once again, not exactly one of our most loyal allies. And we can produce all of this stuff here, but we've chosen not to over the past number of decades for whatever reason.
So give us a little optimism. Where do we go from here?
Well, it's still a fight, and that's what we're doing. We haven't given up yet. It's just like I stated before, even up to a week and a half ago, we had the large social media campaign getting people to actually call the governor's office and say, vote no on this. When we sat down at the beginning of the month with all of our local assembly members, as well as local senators, we told them, encourage the governor, encourage the people that sit on the right and left of you to contact the governor's staff and say, don't sign this. It's devastating for upstate New York agriculture. Part of what New York Farm Bureau also does is we adopt downstate legislators because we all know there's not a lot of agriculture going on in the center of the Bronx and in Queens and Brooklyn. And so those folks don't know our issues. So we need to educate them on our issues. And that's what we've been doing. And that's what we continue to do, is to educate them about why the overtime threshold is nasty and will negatively affect your food deserts in the center of Queens.
And that really is a key issue. I remember when Senator Metzger, then Senator Metzger, had those hearings down at Sullivan Community College, and Senator John Liu was one of the attendees. Senator Robert Jackson, I believe was his name. Liu is out in Queens. Jackson is in Manhattan. And I remember distinctly Senator Liu saying something about, well, apples come from the supermarket. And he was sincere. He was sincere in that. And so you're right, there's an incredible disconnect. So if there's one thing that folks who are on the call, who are watching and listening to this today, can do, what would that be? Because, you know, you and I know our local, our assembly reps, our senators, folks like Mike Martucci, Pete Overrocker, Brian Miller, Chris Tague. There isn't a more vocal, strenuous advocate for agriculture, I think, than Chris Tague. You know, they understand the issues and are very vocal and are great advocates for all of us and for agriculture in Albany. But what can folks who are watching us right now, what can they do? What's the one thing that you would ask folks to do?
It's probably the easiest thing is to go to our website, nyfb.org, NewYorkFarmBureau.org. So, and on there we have a e-lobby button, and from there you can send a personalized message right to the governor and to your legislators, asking them to not sign this piece of legislation. So that's the number one easiest thing to do. Outside of that, it's once again, talk to your local legislators when you do and say, please look to your left and look to your right, work across the aisle, because quite honestly, that's who's controlling Albany right now. All of those legislators that you just referred to are from one side of the aisle. Everybody else is over on the other, and that's where the power is right now in the state. And it's our local folks that know exactly what's going on, but they've got to communicate and actively work and sell our upstate issues to our downstate brethren.
So, oh, and by the way, those who are listening and watching, who are members, when you get your newsletter, we will include something in our next couple newsletters, probably a recording of today's program, but we'll also include that link that Todd just mentioned, to make it easy and so we can really combine our voices as one with the folks at our friends at Farm Bureau. Todd, are there other issues affecting agriculture that we should be looking for? You talked about the control of the legislature and what may be happening, and right now it's the middle of toward the end of March. We're getting into, as you said before, the big ugly season, the budget season, where it seems that everything gets clumped into the budget process, whether it concerns budget issues or not. Are there other issues that are affecting agriculture that we should be looking at right now?
Sure. Some of the things that we talked with our legislators back at the beginning of the month with, some of it was Senator Heyn, who is the current agricultural chair within the New York State Senate, has a couple of bills out. One is to increase the current production of USDA processing plants in New York State. Granted, that's only 5 million, which could be put into a single USDA processing plant. But this is one of the issues that came out and was highlighted during the beginning of the pandemic, is the lack of USDA processing. For example, is we talked about dairy farms transitioning to beef. In order to turn that beef cow into a gorgeous ribeye or tenderloin, you need to have that animal processed. And we have lost over the last couple of years, and even a processing plant in Stamford, Eckland's, is no longer a USDA processing plant. They're private now, and that's a challenge for farmers to be able to get their animals processed. So that's a challenge. Granted, it's only 5 million, but it's a start. She also has pending legislation that she is yet to release that will allow custom exempt butcher shops to be able to, if I take my animal there, I can then turn around and sell the cuts from that animal direct to consumer or to a restaurant by the cut. Rather than right now, in order to have an animal processed through a custom exempt butcher, I need to buy either a half or a quarter or a portion of that animal, not just a steak or a chop. And that would allow the smaller producers It's to be able to find a market for those animals, as well as allowing the mid-sized producers it's to have greater access to more slaughterhouses and butchers. So
Okay,
that's something that we're looking forward to coming out later this year.
so that they wouldn't, that exempt shop would not need to go through the USDA process?
That's correct. Just through New York State inspections that they currently already do. And that meat would not be able to be sold outside of New York State, but it would be perfectly legal to sell across the state directly to a restaurant or to the end consumer.
So they would go through New York State Ag and Markets?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
And
So the
health
inspection
department,
process,
yep. So
there's still an inspection process in there?
absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
Nobody wants unsafe food in the market, in the supply chain. That's not good for anybody at any point in time.
No, certainly.
Yep.
Certainly. Todd, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome, Ray. Anytime.
This morning. You know, the Delaware County Farm Bureau and New York State Farm Bureau and the Delaware County Chamber often work very closely together on issues of concerns to farmer, and I certainly value your continued support. So thank you for spending some time with us this morning, and I always rely on your insight as to what's happening. And thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Please remember that our next in-person breakfast, yes, we're back to in-person breakfasts, will be on Friday, April 15th at the Hampton Inn. Katie Blaine with the Get There program will join us to speak about some transportation options that exist right now for your employees. Go to delawarecounty.org for information about upcoming events, training programs, and news that you can use in your business today. Our next Chamber Connects program will be on Thursday, April 28th, the fourth Thursday of the month, starting at 8:30. And I expect that Assembly Representative Chris Tay, we referred to Chris a little while ago, Chris is going to join us and give us his observations on the state budget and other matters that are happening in Albany. Chris is never dull, and the conversation, I'm sure, will be lively and entertaining. Remember, at the Delaware County Chamber of Commerce, we really are stronger together. See y'all soon.